All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating book, Robert Wright's The Moral Animal. We're going to try and get to the bottom of the hidden evolutionary logic behind, well, why we act so human.
So, right from the get-go, the book throws this huge idea at you. Wright basically says, look, all those complicated feelings we have, love, guilt, jealousy, ambition, they're not just things we learn from society. Nope. He argues they're actually ancient survival strategies, literally hardwired into our brains by natural selection.
Now here's the cool part. To show us how this all works, Wright doesn't just hit us with dry, abstract theories. Instead, he does something brilliant. He uses the life of Charles Darwin himself as the main case study. Yeah, that's right. We're going to look at Darwin's marriage, his social life, even his conscience, to see these evolutionary forces playing out in real time.
All right, let's get into it. First things first, we need to kind of put on a new pair of glasses to see the world. We're looking through the lens of evolutionary psychology.
So what's the big idea here? Evolutionary psychology makes this incredible claim. Inside our modern skulls, we've basically got a Stone Age mind. Think about that. It means our deepest psychological wiring wasn't shaped in today's world of cities and offices. It was forged out on the savannah, dealing with the really raw challenges of survival and reproduction that our ancestors faced for thousands and thousands of years.
And once you start looking through this lens, Wright starts asking some pretty provocative questions, Questions that cut right to the heart of our social lives. Like, are men and women really wired differently when it comes to relationships? And what's the actual biological reason for monogamy? These are exactly the kinds of questions we're going to dig into.
Okay, so let's see how this all plays out in the real world. And where better to start than with the most fundamental driver of all of evolution, the mating game.
To really get a grip on the different strategies in this game, we need to talk about something called parental investment theory. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually super simple and really powerful. It just says that whichever sex has to put in more time, more energy, and take more risks to have and raise a baby, well, that's the sex that's going to be way more selective, way more picky about choosing a mate.
And for humans, this is where you see a huge difference, a core asymmetry. On one hand, for females, the biological investment is just massive. We're talking a limited number of eggs, 9 months of pregnancy, then nursing. It's a huge commitment. So their strategy naturally leans towards seeking a high-quality, committed partner. But for males, the absolute minimum biological investment is, well, it's tiny. And that, the theory goes, creates a biological drive for quantity and opportunity.
And this brings us right back to our case study, Charles Darwin. He is the perfect illustration of this. See, Darwin didn't just romantically fall head over heels into marriage. Oh no, he was the poster child for this kind of selective strategic thinking. He actually made a methodical list of pros and cons.
I mean, he literally wrote it all down on paper. On the pros side, you have things like children, having a constant companion, and, quote, someone to take care of house. But on the con side, he worried about a terrible loss of time for his scientific work. In the end, though, the evolutionary and social benefits clearly won out, and he wrapped it all up with a very logical, very Darwinian conclusion: marry, marry, marry.
Okay, so if you're following along, you might be thinking, if evolution is all about this fierce competition for mates and resources, why aren't we all just completely, ruthlessly selfish? Where does something like kindness or altruism even come from?
Well, the first piece of the puzzle is something called kin selection. Try looking at it from the perspective of a gene for a second. Helping your brother or sister survive and have their own kids is almost as good as having kids yourself. Why? Because they share your genes. So that deep-seated instinct to protect your family, even if it costs you something, it's not some big mystery. It's actually a form of genetic self-interest.
Okay, but what about helping people who aren't related to us? Friends, neighbors. That's where the second piece comes in, reciprocal altruism. And this is basically the biological foundation for that old saying, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's this brilliant evolutionary strategy that lets cooperation, friendship, and even trust bubble up between people who are, at some level, still competitors.
And this is where it gets really, really cool. Our feelings are the tools that make this whole system work. Think about it. Sympathy is what makes you want to help someone in the first place. Guilt is that little nudge that tells you to repay a favor. And that feeling of moral indignation, that outrage, that's our brain's way of punishing cheers. So these things aren't just random feelings. They're like these incredibly finely tuned social calculators. But let's be real, our social world isn't all just happy cooperation and friendship. It's also a battlefield, a fiercely competitive arena for social status. And that competition has shaped a much darker, much more complex and deceptive side of our minds.
So here's a pretty unsettling idea from Wright. He argues that our big brains evolved less to be truth-seeking machines and more to be argument-winning machines. And why would that be? Well, because for our ancestors, high social status was everything. It was the currency that bought you better food, better protection, and of course, more chances to pass on your genes. Just think about how much time and energy we still pour into managing our reputations, both online and in real life.
And guess what? Even our guy Charles Darwin, the supposed model of Victorian humility, was no exception to this rule. He was intensely ambitious. He was a master at managing his reputation, and he strategically built alliances with high-status scientists, like the famous geologist Charles Lyell, to help promote and defend his theories.
So here's the kicker, and this is a big one. The best way to deceive other people is to deceive yourself first. If you genuinely believe your own self-inflated stories, you're just that much more convincing. It's the ultimate psychological hack. We believe our own PR so that everyone else will too. And this is the engine driving so much of what we see around us. Office politics, how we justify our own questionable actions, and yeah, a whole lot of social media.
Okay, so after going through all of this, if our deepest, most profound moral feelings are really just genetic strategies for survival, what does that mean for us? What are the implications for how we live our lives, for how we even think about right and wrong?
This is probably the most challenging, maybe even unsettling idea in the entire book. It's this suggestion that our moral compass, it isn't actually pointing to some absolute, universal, capital T truth. It was shaped by evolution purely to help small bands of hunter-gatherers cooperate with each other and compete with outsiders. Our very sense of justice is, at its core, an adaptation. But, and please, this is the most critical distinction we can make. Explaining where our impulses come from is not the same thing as excusing them. Just because we understand that jealousy has deep biological roots, that doesn't make cheating okay. Just because we recognize we might be wired for tribalism, that absolutely does not justify prejudice. We have to remember, natural does not equal good.
And all of this leads to the book's really powerful final point. The goal here isn't to make us feel like we're just helpless puppets dancing on the strings of our genes. It's the exact opposite. By understanding our programming, by seeing the ancient instincts and biases that are pulling those strings, we actually gain the power to rise above them.
So that leaves us with one final, very challenging thought to chew on. If we can understand the source code of our own moral software, doesn't that, in a way, make us more free and maybe more responsible? Responsible for choosing which parts of that ancient code we want to follow and which parts we want to try and rewrite for ourselves. And that, really, is the ultimate question the moral animal leaves us with.